Next up, we have Douglas Quinby from PhoCusWright, and I've known Douglas for many years. He is a genius. He's absolutely one of the most intelligent guys you'll ever meet. He's a little bit of a nerd, and that's okay to say because nerds are cool now. So he's going to have some stats and stuff, but it's really, really interesting stuff for our industry. It's really important that we know this stuff, and it's really great that we have someone like PhoCusWright really starting to focus on our industry. PhoCusWright is a hugely respected research firm, and they do a lot of things in the hospitality industry, and he's going to tell us all about that. So if Douglas will join me, that would be great.
So I've never actually been called a nerd in front of 800 people like this. But you gotta love the VRMA conference, right? Thank you very much, Steve. So it really is here to share some results from now our second study in the vacation rental market in the U.S. It's kind of nice to be let out of my basement. I get to step away from all of my my spreadsheets. There's mountains and mountains of them. I was actually here at this conference, say about 5 years ago now, 2008, presenting the results from our first study. If you remember anything from that study, it's probably going to be this, right? This $24 billion figure. So this is what we had projected in 2007 was the size of the market. This is what U.S. travelers spent on vacation rentals in 2007. So wow, what a big market, this extraordinary opportunity. But for me, what was the most exciting thing when we first dove into this market, and we were coming at it really from a travel industry lens, from a hospitality lens, some of the things that were taking place were extraordinary, right? This incredible shift from offline and very manual processes to online and very digital engagement with travelers. A lot of the things that we took for granted in the hotel world were really starting to make their impact felt within vacation rentals. It was an extraordinary thing to see. There were scores of startups. So I didn't realize actually that LiveRes was 18 years old. So that's quite something. But these are just some of the companies that that I recall and we looked at. Some of these companies are still with us today, right? Some are not. I think it's amazing. It wasn't that long ago when HomeAway itself also was just a startup. So, the big question, right, for today, $24 billion 5-6 years ago. So what does the market look like today? Where have we come? How much have we grown? How much is online, right? Online bookings become a part of this market. What are some of the dynamics in terms of the rental by owner sector versus the managed sector? How have consumers' attitudes around vacation rentals changed? Has awareness grown within this marketplace? So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about over the next 40 to 45 minutes. And I can tell you there's a lot to talk about. Okay, we did a lot in this study. This just gives you kind of a snapshot. Basically, a significant consumer survey, a homeowner survey, a survey of vacation rental management companies. VRMCs is the acronym that we use, property managers. By the way, if you took the time to respond to that survey, thank you very much. But we did a great deal, much more than I can try to address in a brief presentation this morning. But I'm really going to try to focus in on consumers, in particular. I know there's been a lot of discussion over the last few days around a lot of the industry issues. I really want to zero in on consumers in particular. Now, I also want to note that there's probably a lot of questions about methodology, how we develop a lot of the numbers and the analysis. I'm not going to actually go through all of that today, but I think everyone here is going to get a copy of the presentation. So you'll all have access to this, and I'm going to include all the detail about that if you've got questions about some of the specifics. But one of the things that we really have to start with is simply the definition, right? What is a vacation rental? If you think about kind of airlines or hotels, right, we know what an airline is, right? We know what an airline looks like. There's lots of industry associations and government regulations, a very clear, well-defined industry. There's about 500 airlines around the world. But we look at vacation rentals. I mean, this is a very different type of marketplace, very different kind of definitions, preconceptions, not only within our industry, but also among consumers as well. I mean, even an association like this, like what you have here with VRMA, is really unique globally within this industry, and it's something that I think all of you should really try to strengthen. It's amazing to see how much this conference itself has grown over the past few years. So we really have to start with, right, what is a vacation rental? So here's how we defined it for this study. And the definition is actually very basic, right? So any residential property rented on a short-term basis to leisure travelers. It's really that simple. It could be an apartment, it could be a condo, it could be a single family, freestanding home. Key criteria, right, the renter is not the owner. So we are excluding the entire world of timeshare and vacation ownership and exchanges, so money has got to exchange hands as part of the transaction. Now, the one last thing I want to do is also acknowledge our partners and our sponsors for the study, VRMA for partnering with us and helping us to field the survey. Also, some of our sponsors. I do want to really call out HomeAway, LeisureLink, and Vacation Roost as well for helping us reach property management companies and also, in some cases, homeowners. And I also want to point out that this is very important with sponsors who financially support the project. And we get these questions a lot, so I do want to address this. As one of the benefits of sponsoring, our sponsors do get to have some input on the objectives, right, on the questions that we ask. However, they don't get any input on the answers, right, on the analysis and the results that we produce. So I will say that if there's anything you don't like, you can come directly to me. So we've done now 3 studies in this market, 2 in the US and 1 in Europe. And I've learned a great deal about the market. It's been pretty amazing. Some of the most complex research, in fact, that I've ever done, given how fragmented and challenging it is to kind of get your arms around this market. But one of the things that I'm pretty aware of is, as much as I've learned, this is not going to stand. Okay, as much as I've learned about the market, I'm also very aware that I am not an operator, right? I'm not in the trenches, right, day to day, doing all the things that you do. So I'm very much looking forward to getting your feedback, and I think we've got some time at the end for Q&A. However, I do want to say that I am a customer. Actually, I am a very frequent customer. And if you've seen me speak about vacation rentals, you'll know that I've got 2 primary reasons why we tend to stay in vacation rentals. All right, so these are our guys. And we try to do a big family vacation each year. And I know what you're probably thinking, right? They're looking perfectly harmless. However, you parents know out there, right, when you take that big family vacation, mom and dad, right, we need multiple bedrooms. Hugely, hugely important. So I am not an operator, but definitely a customer. Okay, so $24 billion, right? This is where we were in 2007. So where are we now in 2012? Oh my goodness, what's happened? How did PhoCusWright screw this up? The market is actually not as big as it was in 2007. So I can tell you, when we first did this, we saw these numbers, we thought we screwed something up. We were running them over and over again to try to figure out what is going on. So I want to just take a step back, right? And before we focus on specifically that big number, right, that size of the market, we need to take a step back and talk about really the most kind of fundamental event that's impacted not only our industry and travel, right, but also just the overall economy, right, and the country. And that, of course, is the recession, the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. It's pretty amazing, actually, if you pick up the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, you find any article about kind of the state of the economy, you just count how many times you see the word recovery. So 5 years on, we are still talking about our country and the economy in the context of recovery, and especially so in travel. I just want to give you a sense of kind of the relative impact of this. So in 2009, US GDP declined 3.1%. So just by a show of hands, I'd like to ask you, how much do you think travel industry revenues declined in 2009? So we'll assume, right, it's going to have declined more, right, than GDP. So how many would say 5%? Anyone? It's kind of hard to see with all the lights. It's okay, you can put your hand up. Okay. How about 10%? Anyone want to say 10? Okay, there's a few more hands. Anyone want to really go for it, shoot the moon? 20%? There's a few more. Okay. And how many people simply refuse to vote? I think it's about, right, half the room. Okay, so here's what actually is what happened. 15%. Yeah. So when the economy has a problem, right, it really stings for travel. I mean, this is hugely traumatic. Right? We all remember 2009. That was not a fun year, right, to be in the travel industry. I mean, think about it, right? Your company's revenues declined 15% year over year, right? Something is going to be different about your company, right, the following year. That is hugely significant. So this is an extremely traumatic, impactful event for the industry. So here's what the US travel market looks like in terms of gross industry revenues. 2007 to 2014, you see that really big dip in 2009, but things start to look pretty good, like there has been a pretty significant recovery. Here is that kind of line, that kind of peak, from pre-recessionary peak from 2008, right? So you can see that actually, boy, as of 2011, we have actually recouped all of those losses. And the outlook looks pretty solid. Boy, the market is growing, and things are looking pretty good. So what's all of this talk about kind of a weak recovery? What is all of that about? So I want to look at this just one other way. So here we're looking at the same data, but this is in terms of year-over-year change rather than the actual dollar value or gross bookings value. So you can see, again, that really big dip in 2009, but some pretty solid growth on a revenue basis, basically double digits or high single digits between 2010 and 2012. Now, I want to look at this in terms of the traveler population. So this is basically the percentage of US adults who have traveled each year. So you can see that big dip in 2009. And that's significant, by the way. What that basically means is millions and millions of travelers who traveled in 2008 stepped out of the market. No, we're not traveling in 2009. It's not happening. Some came back in 2010, but actually the growth has been pretty anemic in 2011 and 2012. So what exactly is going on? Well, it's a very uneven recovery. Another way to look at this, if you look at the airline industry, a very pronounced example. So since 2009, airline industry revenues have been like this, but enplanements, right, the number of travelers that are actually getting on a plane has basically been flat, right? So airlines have reduced capacity. They've been able to raise fares, been strong demand on the corporate side, but not on leisure. So a lot of complex dynamics to this, but fundamentally, you've got a very uneven recovery since 2009. In effect, you've got far fewer travelers who are accounting for a much bigger portion of the total spend, right? The total spend opportunity. I think of it as basically the haves, right, and the have-mores. You've got two kind of core kind of segments of the population. We think of them as your kind of infrequent leisure travelers. So the majority of travelers, it's about 58, 59%. They take just 1 to 2 trips a year. They're very price sensitive, and they're not very brand loyal. And then you've got a smaller group that take more trips, but they account for a much bigger piece of total spend. Really important, especially in terms of understanding your customers and your segmentation. I mean, this is a pretty simplistic view, but really brings home how important it is to really understand the type of customer you're going after and some of the key differences across these different these travelers. Now, what does this all mean in terms of vacation rentals? So we've seen that, in fact, it's not actually all that negative. So we see that the number of vacation rental travelers or vacation rental guests has actually grown. Right? So this is pretty positive. The number of travelers, that awareness of the market has actually increased since our first study in 2007. However, their travel behavior has not. So what does that mean? So the incidence, right, the percentage of U.S. adults who've stayed in a vacation rental is up, but their confidence has not come back. They're still taking fewer trips. They're spending less. They're taking shorter trips. So I actually see this as kind of generally, quite positive. And if you step back and, don't worry too much about that kind of big number, which really, unless you're a very large national player or even a global player, that big number is really not that important for you, right? It's really about the market that you're in, especially for vacation rentals. I mean, this is a hyper-local, hyper-seasonal industry, as all of you know. So you really need to be understanding what's happening in the markets that you are directly serving. But I think that this is actually a very positive indication, because what this tells me is a couple of things. One is awareness of your market, awareness of your industry, and the products that you're offering has actually grown. What hasn't come back, what hasn't grown, is that kind of consumer confidence, very much tied to the economy, right? And travelers' kind of willingness, their comfort to be able to spend. Now, we're going to spend most of our time this morning talking about the U.S. market, but I just want to step back too for a minute and look at some other countries. So this is vacation rental incidence across 5 key countries. This is incidence among the traveler population, so the percentage of travelers from each of these countries who have stayed in a vacation rental. By the way, I'm sorry, I have asked the AV team to put the data up on this screen as well. Hopefully that's going to come pretty soon. I know it's probably tough to see if you're sitting all the way in that side of the room. But what you can see here is pretty interesting, right? So we're focused a lot on the U.S. market, but it's actually a relatively small opportunity, right? You look at Europe, and the opportunity is pretty exciting, right? Especially look at Germany, right? The incidence among German travelers, 3 times as high as what it is in the U.S. I mean, you've got to love Germans, right? I mean, what is it, 5, 6 weeks of vacation, and they take all of it, right? They take these really long trips. It's fantastic. So very different opportunity. Also, I just want to note here as well, China, all the way over on the far right. Okay, so 16% of Chinese travelers have stayed in a vacation rental. So it's quite possible, a lot of you here are not really thinking about China. There's a perception, especially of Chinese travelers when they travel abroad, a lot of kind of group tours and maybe not a key target market for vacation rentals. But I think if you take a long-term view of the market, it's something I would certainly keep your eye on. Just as a little perspective, we did some work in the Chinese market earlier this year. We project that there's about 256 million travelers in China. So that's 250 million travelers. This is people who have either flown by commercial air or stayed in paid accommodation for a leisure trip. So 256 million. I'll let you do the math, right? 16% of 250 million. That's a pretty interesting number. And that number is only going in one direction, I can assure you. Okay, so kind of back to the U.S., how do vacation rental guests in the U.S. choose property A versus property B, right? This is kind of like the the grail, right? How do they make that decision? What is really important to them? And obviously there are some really basic things, right? Like price and location, hugely important. I haven't included those here because that's kind of a baseline, and price is like always going to be at the top, right? But one of the things that really stands out for U.S. vacation rental guests in particular is the features, the functionality of the property. Like, remember, I was joking a bit about the multiple bedrooms at the beginning, but actually it's a very serious thing. Like, it's really important, right? We need a certain number of bedrooms, right? You think about the vacation rental trip. It's going to be a longer trip, more people involved. I need to find that property that is going to fit that trip. Now, by comparison, we did our study in Europe a couple of years ago. Europeans, very, very different attitudes. Right? For them, couldn't care less about a washer or dryer. Their ambitions, their desires around vacation rentals kind of much more aspirational. Things like freedom, privacy. They want to have a unique setting or an independent type of experience. So it's a much more aspirational set of attributes. So very kind of distinct dynamics between European and also kind of US vacation rental travelers. So if you're engaged in both markets and you're going after vacation rental guests from Europe as well as from the US, very different approaches, I think, are required in terms of engaging them, messaging, your marketing to those two markets. Okay, so now let's turn to the structure of the US market. And we're going to look at this a couple of different ways. The first, just a very basic view of the market, and that is vacation style. So was your trip, was it a beach or kind of ocean type of kind of setting? Was it an urban setting or a mountain type of location? Right, so no surprise here, the largest category by a significant margin, beach and ocean, right? We all know that. Top destinations, Florida, the Carolinas, to some extent the Gulf Coast and California. So no big surprise. This is what we've all known for years. It's also interesting, the average spend, right, which is in the kind of the green line there, significantly greater, and that correlates directly to length of stay, right? So those beach and ocean stays tend to be that family vacation, a much longer trip. City and urban stays, right? A big market that Airbnb and a lot of the Airbnb type companies have been focusing on. Actually, it's not that big of a market, about 12 to 13%. And then I also want to highlight here ski as well, at about 5-6% of the market. Seems relatively small, actually. So in the whole universe of vacation rentals, ski, not a huge piece of the vacation rental world. However, if we kind of turn that around, right, and look at the ski market, we actually have a very different picture. So we did a study specifically on US ski travelers early this year, and we found something pretty remarkable. One question that we ask in all of our consumer research in any market that we do is simply, what types of lodging have you used at any point for any leisure trips over the past year? And here we're comparing US travelers, ski travelers, and we're just looking at some of the most popular categories, key kind of hotel categories, mid and upscale, right, and also vacation rentals. And here we've broken this out, right, so vacation rentals through a property manager as well as directly with an owner. And so you can see still that the kind of classic hotel categories are among the most common. But look at ski travelers for that, for vacation rentals. 1 out of 4 ski travelers have stayed in a professionally managed vacation home for a ski trip over the past year, and 1 out of 5 have stayed in a vacation home rented directly with an owner, as compared with the general US traveler population. In fact, in our general US study, we don't even make the distinction between kind of VRMC versus RBO because the incidence is relatively low. So this is hugely, hugely, significantly different. When we see differences like this between segments of the population, statistically, this is enormously different, and it really speaks to the importance of vacation rentals in the ski market. And you think about it, right, it makes a lot of sense, right? A ski trip, travelers are going to be spending more, tend to involve more people, there are longer trips, all that gear, right? So you need that space, right? You need multiple bedrooms. It's a theme I seem to be coming back to again and again. But I really urge you, if you're involved in the ski market, really look at that ski traveler, a very interesting segment of the traveler population. They tend to spend more, they're much more affluent, very passionate about ski, have very specific things that they want out of that ski vacation, also extremely digitally engaged. Their ownership of mobile devices, whether it's tablet or phones, their use of those devices across the trip planning life cycle, significantly greater than the typical US traveler population. So another big question, right, another big dynamic is management method. So what is going on in terms of the professionally managed or property managers versus that rental by owner marketplace. Now this was, of course, a really big issue. We've looked at this a lot of different ways, right, through the lens of the homeowner, as well as through the property management company in this study. I'm just going to focus on one today. It's such a complex issue. I'm just going to focus on one, and that is the consumer. So going back, when I presented here 5 years ago, it was really quite striking the conversations that were taking place, both in public and in sessions like this, but also especially outside and just in the general kind of networking and discussions. It was a very kind of contentious environment, right? It really was, one against the other, and a lot of concern, right? A lot of issues involved. I mean, you got a new business model, a new segment of the industry that is going after your customers, both your guests, right, as well as your homeowners. So one of the things we wanted to do in this second study is really look at what is going on from the consumer perspective, right? Do they have a preference, right? Do they do one or the other purposefully? Are there things that they like about one versus their other? Can we try to get underneath that and really understand what is going on there? So we asked them very simply, first of all, do you have a preference, right? Work with the owner directly or to work with the management company? Or do you even know the difference, right, for that matter? So it looks like consumers, they fall into some pretty clear buckets, right? It seems that way. So 8% say they're not sure of the difference, which is, I think, pretty positive, right? So there's some clear distinctions. The largest group in the middle, 35%, have no preference whatsoever. And then 1 out of 4 prefer working directly with an owner. About 31% prefer working with a management company. Okay, this is kind of interesting. So let's kind of dig into this and see what is really going on here. So then we tried to overlay booking method with this and to see what was happening. And actually, the lines started to get pretty blurry because we saw that a meaningful minority of those that say they prefer homeowners, their last vacation rental stay, they booked with a management company. And likewise, for those that say they preferred working with a manager. So we started to get kind of confused about this, and we looked at a whole range of things, like what types of things do you associate with a management company versus working directly with an owner? Or what are the things that really drive your decision-making around one property versus another? And we try to do all sorts of correlation analysis to see if we could unearth, like, what are those criteria that drive a consumer to choose one method versus another? And ultimately, what it all came back to was it was very hard to parse it out. And again, it really came back to finding that property to fit the trip. So it was things like price, things like location, things like the features and functions, the amenities, right, of a property. I've got a specific trip. I want to go to a specific place. I've got X number of people coming along. The most important thing is I've got to find a property that's going to fit in all of those criteria, right? And it's something that I can afford. So from a consumer perspective, it's quite interesting, but really this whole dynamic, right, RBO versus VRMC, really kind of goes to the background. I don't mean to diminish a lot of the very serious issues within the industry, but from a consumer perspective, it's not really so much about management method whatsoever. It's really about the property itself, right, and how that property can serve that particular trip. So what is really important to consumers? So here I want to look at the online market, okay, first, because we've seen an incredible growth in the extent to which consumers are shopping online and also booking online. I think there have been some breakout sessions over the course of the conference which have presented some of these findings already, so you may be familiar with some of them. First, just looking at shopping, right? So we asked vacation rental guests to tell us, okay, how do you typically shop for a vacation rental? So 3 out of 4 say they do it online, typically. And this is across all platforms. This is desktop, phone, and tablet. The mobile incidence in aggregate is about 14–15%, but growing, obviously, quite significantly. So then we'll also look at booking, right? So of that's 73%, that 3 to 4, how many booked online, booked and paid for their vacation rental online for their last trip. It's about 24%. Just as a point of comparison, if we look at the leisure hotel market, it's about 44, 45%, depending upon how you define the kind of the leisure market within hotels. It could be a bit higher or a bit lower. So we see that vacation rentals are a bit behind. However, I think that in this study in particular, you've got to take a different approach to simply shopping and booking, because we see that there's an enormous amount of offline or channel leakage, right, from online shopping to offline booking. However, there's a really critical step, which is right in the middle, which is finding your property. So you can shop online, but where did you actually find your property, even if you ultimately booked it offline? And there it's really quite substantial, right? So 73% shopped online, 68% of the 100% found the property online. So overwhelmingly, over 90% of those online shoppers also found that property online. And I think this is actually a better indicator to some extent of the online penetration, right, within this market. Right, so it's really not that 24%. That's certainly going to grow, especially with all of the things that are taking place in the market. We've seen, especially with vacation rental management companies, huge shifts in the extent to which all of you are offering online booking and ramping up your capabilities. The announcements from HomeAway over the past couple of weeks, they seem to keep on coming out, but it's very clear that that 24% number is going to grow quite significantly. But I really think it's 68%, right, that finding online, that is a really powerful indicator of the potential and the real penetration of the role of the internet in the shopping and booking process. So this is the extent to which, right, travelers are shopping, finding, and booking online. So what's really important to them? I want to spend a couple of minutes looking at this. So here are a range of kind of features and kind of functions, components of websites that you'll use to kind of shop online. Want to get a sense of what is really important, right? What really matters to vacation rental shoppers. So if you just kind of read down the list, there are some things that are quite interesting here. It may seem very obvious to you at first, right? So the ability to check price and availability, descriptions of the properties and amenities, photos by the website as opposed to traveler-submitted photos. The ability to book online, very important. The ability to call and speak with someone, very important. Online reviews from guests. All of these things, very important, right? Extremely influential for more than half of all vacation rental guests. Now, so what's really interesting about this? We ask a very similar question for your typical travel shopper, right? Your hotel shopper. And the order of these things is completely turned around. So what's really important for hotel shoppers is guest reviews, right, more than anything else, as well as interactive maps, right, where they can plot the hotel on a map and kind of figure out where it is in a city and where it is relative to all of the things that they've done or they want to do, right, in their destination. But things like the ability to check price and availability or the ability to book online, I mean, honestly, we've stopped asking that for several years now because it was a default. But it's clearly hugely important for vacation rental shoppers. Also, guest reviews, hugely important. I think the fact that it's not actually higher up is simply because the industry is still accumulating a lot of this content, and it's not as pervasive in this market as in hotels. If you think about the hotel market, now all the big chains, or most of them, are actually either pulling reviews from TripAdvisor or reaching out to their own loyalty member or loyalty program members and incorporating reviews on their own websites. But this is clearly critically important for that traveler to make a decision, especially, right, in a market, like this where you don't have the brands and the star ratings the way you do in the hotel market. The really key differentiator is that hotel shopper, they have a very clear sense, we can see a very clear sense of what I would expect, right, based on the star rating, based on the brand, perhaps some aggregate guest review scores. I have a very clear sense of, okay, this is what I'm going to pay. This is what I should be getting, right? Whereas in the vacation rental market, it's a much more complex So much more difficult decision, right? A lot more hand-holding involved, a lot more elements in the decision, which is why the ability to call and speak with someone online is also so hugely important. So even this is something as well that we've heard from a lot of you. Even if you've got a booking that is transacted, right, completely online, at some point typically, right, you get a phone call, you have some offline engagement, there's some question about the property, about the experience. So a lot of things that really go into figuring out how to create that optimal experience for the vacation rental guest. So we've looked at the extent to which travelers, vacation rental guests are shopping and booking online and some of the things that are really important to them. So now I want to look at why they choose one website over another, like what is really important to them. And this is actually something as well that we ask in a whole range of studies across all of our markets. And there's a lot of things that we look at. I mean, we look at, of course, price, the kind of breadth, right, and depth of inventory, the user experience, if they've had a good experience with that website before, if there's kind of a brand loyalty connection, a range of things, right? But we always see there's one thing, right? Always one thing that consumers tell us above and beyond anything else that is really hugely important to them in that decision, right, of one website versus another. Anyone want to guess, by the way? Throw out an idea. What is that one thing that's most important? Pictures. Sorry, anything else? Calendar. Simplicity. Who said simplicity? Yeah. Ease of use. Far and away, right? So what's interesting about this, I mean, it seems really obvious, right? In fact, we were presenting this on a webinar, this was a while ago. Someone tweeted this out, and there was some guy in the UK who said something to the effect of PhoCusWright sucks eggs. You guys know what that expression means? So anyone here from the UK, you know what that means? What's that? So yeah, I had to look it up. I had no idea. But basically, it's kind of I guess it's UK for stating the bleeding obvious, right? So of course, right? So user experience, right? Ease of use, hugely, hugely important to consumers. But why would I say that, right? Why would I bring this up, something that's so obvious? Well, just think about, right, all of those things that we just talked about, and especially in your industry. So things like the importance of property descriptions, including guest reviews, especially getting guest reviews from your guests, right? Especially if you're not running large units with 2,000 rooms like the hotel we're in here. Incorporating all of those things, right, that are so important to a vacation rental shopper to help them make that decision, because that decision is so difficult. There are so many more questions involved, so many more issues that they need to deal with to make that decision. So hugely, hugely important. And actually creating a easy experience, right, is extremely complex on the back end, right? For all of the things that you have to do to kind of put into the equation, right? So very, very difficult. Great design, brilliant design that is extremely easy to use for the consumer is actually very, very difficult. And this becomes even more difficult, right, when we think about mobile, right? So if you have not attended some of the sessions here on mobile, then I really encourage you to really focus on this segment because we are seeing just an extraordinary shift in consumer behavior around mobile. It is happening across every geography. It is happening across every phase of the travel planning life cycle. But increasingly, travelers are engaging in the shopping, finding, right, and also the booking process and sharing through their mobile devices. And just to give you a sense of this, we'll look at two markets in Europe, the two largest travel markets in Europe. This is Germany and the UK. And we are looking at the incidence among mobile phone owners, so travelers who own a mobile phone, the percentage of those who have either researched for a travel product like a flight or a hotel, or have booked a travel product like a flight or a hotel on their phone specifically. So we're not talking about tablets, but on their phone specifically. So it's pretty amazing. First of all, the thing that really jumps out, right, is year-over-year growth across all segments, right, in all markets. But just looking at research in the UK, so this tells us basically 1 out of 3 have at some point over the past year in the UK researched, right, or shopped for a flight or a hotel on their phone. That's pretty significant. And UK, by the way, has always been kind of an online leader, not just in Europe, but also globally. Online penetration is higher in the UK than it is in the US, and we're seeing the same patterns with mobile adoption as well. And then look at booking. So 1 out of 4 UK travelers say, yes, I have either booked a flight or a hotel on my phone in the past year. Now, I think that may be a little bit overstated, or it may be something where the traveler, they found their hotel and there was a click-to-call option, so they may not have actually entered all their payment details. But I think what's really important, right, in their minds, 1 out of 4 UK travelers who own a mobile phone, and it's basically, basically all of them, say they or think they have booked a flight or a hotel on their phone, right? So that's pretty significant. Now, we also asked them, well, what do they expect to do, right, in the next 12 months? So the numbers really shoot up. Now, again, it doesn't mean absolutely guaranteed, right? Nearly half of all UK travelers are going to book a flight or a hotel on their phone over the next year. But it's a very powerful indicator of their expectations, right? Of their intentions. And even though kind of vacation rentals are a bit more complex, the incidence for kind of shopping, certainly for booking, is going to be well kind of lower, and we've seen that in our study where the incidence of shopping in the US is about 14% across phone and tablet. But without question, this is going to rise, right, as these devices increasingly take over the entire travel planning process. So if I leave you with one thing, or if you leave this session with one thing, it is simply, mobile. The trends that we're seeing are transcending geography, right? They are transcending demographics, right? So the typical presumption, right? This is going to be younger travelers, more kind of early adopters of technology. It's transcending all age groups. It's transcending all kind of demographic segments like affluence. This is becoming just a central part of the travel planning and shopping, if not necessarily today, the booking process. And if you can nail that easy-to-use experience, right? If you can get that and fit all of that into a 5 or maybe a 6-inch screen, right? Then that desktop website suddenly looks, a lot less of a difficult challenge to take on. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I think we've got some time for Q&A if anyone has questions. So thank you. Any questions from anyone? To leap and bound over tables.
Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Just a quick question about what you've done in the past or what you're planning to do to address the market segment represented by Airbnb.
Yeah.
And it's, when we look at the total travel market, we have to look at hotels, shared space, such as Airbnb, and a vacation rental unit by owner or by a management company. So at the end of the day, travelers have a choice, and they're only going to choose one. So can you address that, what you guys have done and what you plan to do to address that part of the market?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time looking at that in the study. I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, we see, I think a pretty clear distinction around, when travelers choose certainly a home versus hotel. And a lot of it, especially in the US, it really has to do, again, with functionality, right? So short trip, just a few people, want conveniences, want the services of a hotel, and that's clearly driving a lot of that. And that actually creates an interesting opportunity, especially for the more kind of heavily managed segment, and we've seen this as well, where there's, I think, an opportunity for some of the more engaged, kind of heavily managed vacation rental management companies that offer a lot of competitive hotel-like services to actually be able to step in to some segment of the hotel market and win some of that business where there is, I think, definitely a cost benefit, a price benefit, especially for the family travel segment. Now, Airbnb and all the clones that they have spawned is really interesting. There is, I think, a widely held perception. I think to some extent it's being fostered by Airbnb itself and to others that it really is kind of a different space. That it's really much more about shared space and this whole thing of the shared economy. And to some extent, it's definitely true. We looked at, in particular in our study, kind of homeowners, so the owners that are listing their property where it's a primary residence, in other words, where they are the primary resident of that home, but from time to time when they're not using the property, they're going to let it out. And there's actually an enormous amount of demand for that. We were amazed to see the incidence of homeowners that actually rent out their primary residence. However, when we look at things like some aspects of the Airbnb experience, one of the key ones is a shared space, like I can stay on someone's couch, right, for a night, or I can rent a room. The actual incidence among our consumer work is like so low. I mean, it's impossible, to really gauge just how big that is. We haven't really seen a lot of growth. So we believe that really for Airbnb to fulfill all of the expectations, right, that have been set around, the valuations that have been circulating in the media, and we believe that it really has to step outside of that much more kind of narrow kind of focus that it has looked at. We haven't seen yet the extent to which that there's this complete revolution where suddenly travelers en masse are kind of moving from hotels or traditional vacation rentals to some type of new, shared type of environment. It's certainly not happening. There is a kind of finite, and I think I made this point as well earlier in the presentation, there is a finite universe of travelers, right, in the hotel stays. It grows a little bit year over year, but especially in the US market. We're not enjoying big double-digit growth. And I think especially in the US market, Airbnb, we're going to see increasingly moving into the space that that you all operate in, that HomeAway operates in, and to some extent that hotels operate in. But one point I do want to make about Airbnb, irrespective of all of and I know there's a lot of very significant debates about their business and whatnot, but one of the things where I think they have absolutely excelled, remember that slide about what's most important to travelers, ease of use. Right? Whatever you think of them, they have built a product that their customers love, and it just starts right with the homepage. And I remember seeing this 4 or 5 years ago. Big picture, single search field. Right? Typically, you go to a travel site today, and you've got where do you want to go, how many people, how many rooms, when do you want to check in, when do you want to leave, any other special considerations. I've got 7, 8 fields that I got to fill out. Consumers don't want that. Give me a single search field. Give me a big, beautiful picture. Let me know I'm going to have an amazing experience. And if you go around and look online, right, look at a whole range of different websites, not just Airbnb clones. Even look at TripAdvisor's recent redesign last week. Big, beautiful picture, single search field at the bottom. So they have really led the market in terms of design, and I think that's one of the key drivers behind a lot of their success. So there's a question here. I think there's another one over here.
Yeah. I was surprised that almost 32% of people found the vacation rental offline. That's, to me, I thought it would have been a smaller percent. So can you tell me what that 32% consists of?
Yeah, that's something else we haven't really touched on here today. In fact, It's amazing still how much of, yeah, by the way, there's a question in the front here, if we have another mic at the front table here. This was actually really, really amazing. In fact, not only have about a third of vacation rental guests, they found their property offline, but actually for RBO owners, a majority of their bookings still come from offline channels, from what I call kind of personal, marketing or informal marketing channels, like through friends and family, kind of neighbors, maybe previous guests. There's still an enormous piece of this market that is offline, and a lot of it is, again, it's kind of through personal networking, friends and family, and it's an amazing kind of piece to this market. I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, I live in Atlanta. And there's and I don't live in a very upscale neighborhood, but boy, there's a lot of people in my neighborhood that they own a home along the Gulf Shores or somewhere in Destin, Florida, and they're frequently going down. They're frequently kind of exchanging among themselves. There's a lot of this market is still very much kind of offline, very much informal. It's reduced quite a bit, especially since the recession. A lot of this market, too, is you still have a lot of owners that are like, I am just going to manage my property. I'm only going to let it to people that I know. This is my home. This is my stuff. I'm not going to let just anybody come in. I'm just going to give it to my friends or my neighbors or my friends of my friends. There may be a financial transaction that takes place, but a big piece of this market, even in that RBO world, right, that's so associated with all of this online innovation and HomeAway and others, a big piece of that is still offline. Yeah.
You had a display that showed that 11% of Americans did vacation rental homes and 2 to 3 times that many of Europeans. Mm-hmm. Could you have overlaid that data with how many Americans even know the vacation rental homes is an option compared to Europeans?
Yes. Yes, we did do that. That's a great question. I can't recall off the top of my head what the figures were for Europe. But if you give me a card, we can follow up and send you a note. But I do believe that the overall awareness of vacation rentals in Europe is much greater, right? It's much more common, and one of the biggest obstacle, right? The reason why most Americans don't stay in vacation rentals overwhelmingly is they just don't even think about it. Like it just simply doesn't even occur to them as an option.
And what I'm wondering is how important it is that the VRMA continue with the initiatives like Getting to Know You, like Discover Vacation Homes, like the Vacation Rental Switch, those visionary things that are going to help us raise that awareness here in this country.
Well, I mean, I think anything that you do, to raise awareness about the category, of course, is going to be, hugely important. So the extent that you can kind of participate and kind of fund that is critical. And I think there are a lot of things, whether it's also through this association. I mean, I think a lot of things, honestly, I mean, it's great. Super Bowl ads work too. I mean, let's be honest about that. So I think there's a lot of pieces to this. But I think obviously anything that you can do, because the biggest obstacle is simply lack of awareness around just not even considering. So it's even if consumers, there's some sense, right? Like everyone knows what a vacation rental is, sort of, right? But when they're in the travel planning process, like it just doesn't even occur to them as an option. Something else that also comes up that is really interesting, especially for certain types of trips, like consumers have a lot of misconceptions about the marketplace, especially given all the changes that we've seen in the marketplace. Just we looked at in our study the range of services and things that vacation rental management companies offer, things like Wi-Fi and front desk check-in and keyless entry and on-site F&B and concierge types of services and all sorts of things. And a lot of consumers, they make the choice because they want these services and they think they can't get these services. So there is a real gap in understanding, I mean, not just in awareness, but in actually how much this market has evolved and the extent to which it is competitive with hotels. So yeah, I mean, obviously, anything that you can do to kind of support that is hugely important.
There's a huge growth in the, let's call it the hotel market with residential features. that are kind of a hybrid of the vacation home and the hotel. Residential inns, breakfast in the morning for free, suites I've stayed in where you can get 1 room, 2 rooms, so you can get a kitchenette in them. So that's kind of a thing right in between as your research put that into a new column.
Oh yeah, that is interesting. I mean, we have looked at that. We do have some specifics on that. You know, I think that that's one way in which hotels have kind of interestingly kind of stepped in and competed with with this market and hotels. But I think a lot of that too really appeals to long-term business travelers as well. I mean, in terms of the kind of the potential overlap in consumer perception between the two. I'm not sure that we have we know exactly what that is. I don't think we've looked at that distinction specifically, but there's definitely a piece, right, of the consumer, the travel marketplace in the U.S. that has stayed in those. But I don't think it's it's really that significant. I mean, when you look at kind of relatively kind of mid-scale, kind of traditional luxury and mid-scale, the kind of extended stay properties and that type of product is relatively low. But I have to admit, we haven't looked at those distinctions and the extent to which it overlaps in the consumer's mind. But that's a great point. Anything else from anyone?
Yeah. Clearly vacation rentals are still considered an alternative method of lodging. People
not for
tend
me,
to,
by the way. I just want to say, not for me.
In terms of the market numbers, right? Yeah. And people tend to fear what they don't understand. And so back to Lance's question about awareness. What data did you gather on concerns that the consumers have in terms of concerns about different, especially some of the RBO situations that we hear of where they're things may not be represented as far as they were, or some of the comical nightmare stories that you hear. What are some of the concerns that surfaced in that data about just the experience overall, but especially professionally managed versus the RBO experiences?
Yeah. So this is actually, I think, a really good thing. It's a great question because the answer is basically none. So we looked at kind of, first of all, just satisfaction, right? So the extent to which vacation rental guests were satisfied with their experience. Overwhelmingly, I mean, the satisfaction is very, very high, right? So I think it's something like more than 4 out of 5, or it's even closer to 9 out of 10. Basically would say they are very or extremely likely to stay in a vacation rental again and to recommend a vacation rental to their friends. We also tried to look at kind of concerns. So what are some of the issues or concerns they had in advance? So we looked at things like, was it working directly with an owner or working with a property management company? And really those concerns, really didn't exist. Now, at the same time, the process is still very different, right, for the shopping process. And I think that the really key indicator there is that finding, right, versus booking. There's a lot of offline, leakage. Which means that there are a lot of questions that consumers have because, unlike in hotels, you don't have service standards, you don't have star ratings, you don't have, these big, national brands where we can clearly kind of associate, price, versus expectation. But certainly when we look at kind of the relative, satisfaction, it's very high, and some of those pre-existing concerns were not really an issue in terms of RBO versus homeowner. There are certain types of guests that they want more in terms of services, right, like front desk check-in and daily maid cleaning, and we see that those guests tend to veer towards VRMCs, right, towards management companies, which you would expect. But this is actually really important. And by the way, and I see this too. It's like every 6 months. The travel editor at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal will say, okay, it's time to do our semi-annual vacation rental guest horror story article, right? Guaranteed. And this, I know it. It comes every 6 months. And it's from the editorial team on top, right? Connect with the consumer. But the fact is, the incidence of those horror stories is so small. And every time you see that story, you should just pull something from PhoCusWright research that says, overwhelmingly, vacation rental guests are completely satisfied, and what you're highlighting here is absolutely an outlier. And this, by the way, is consistent. You know, across both the RBO sector as well as on the VRMC side, generally we see that guests across both are satisfied. I mean, it really has to do with, you know, with the property and with the experience.
Leave it at that today.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you.